the dense jungles of Central America, beneath the canopy of ceiba trees and vines, lie the ruins of one of the most complex mythological systems the ancient world ever conceived. Long before the Spanish conquest, before even the rise of powerful Mayan cities like Tikal and Palenque, stories were passed down, stories not just of gods and heroes, but of failed creations, celestial battles, and a cosmos that operated in repeating cycles of destruction and renewal. What if time didn't move in a straight line, but in circles? What if the human race had been created and destroyed not once, but several times before we got it right? And what if the stars themselves were seen not just as distant objects, but as living participants in the destiny of humankind? This is the entire story of Mayan mythology. Let's begin. In the worldview of the ancient Maya, time did not begin with light. It began in silence, in darkness, in a space where nothing yet existed. There was no sun, no moon, no stars, no sky. Not even the earth had form. This was the primordial state known in Mayan cosmology as the void. It was not a place, but a condition, a formless emptiness waiting to be shaped. And this is where their mythology begins. According to the Popol Vuh, the sacred narrative of the Quiche Maya, the world began not with a single creator, but with a pair of divine forces, Tepeo and Guchumats. These gods were not personifications of thunder or war, but creators, forces of thought and speech, vision and intention. In the silence of the cosmic void, they conceived the world into being. The Popol Vuh tells us, they spoke, they thought, and instantly it was. With their word alone, the sky and the earth were formed. But what existed before their thought? The Maya described it simply. There was only the sea and the sky, no land, no sun, only the calm of a boundless ocean and the great blue above. This pairing of sea and sky became the foundation for all creation myths in the region. It was from this harmony and this tension that the world was born. The creators did not act alone. Other forces were present. The heart of sky, made up of three divine aspects, Kakulha Hurakan, Chipikakulha, and Raksa Kakulha. These names are often translated as the gods of thunder and lightning, and together they played a critical role in the emergence of creation. Hurakan, in particular, was seen as a storm god, his name surviving today in the word hurricane. He would help give shape to the world and participate in the first attempts to make humanity. In this early phase of creation, time itself had not yet begun. The Maya believed in cycles, eras called worlds or suns, each one eventually destroyed and replaced by the next. These cycles were not metaphorical, but deeply embedded in their calendar and worldview. Creation was not a one-time act, but a process that repeated until the balance of the universe was finally achieved. As the gods shaped the earth, they also created the mountains, rivers, and skies. They arranged the stars and designated sacred directions. The east, where the sun would rise, was particularly important. It was the place of beginnings. The underworld, known as Xibalba, also emerged in this cosmic design, a shadowy realm beneath the earth, filled with trials, gods of death, and the ancestors of human beings. One remarkable feature of Mayan mythology is how closely it ties to geography and nature. The void is not just an abstract concept. It reflects the deep jungle nights, the cave systems that descend into darkness, and the dense mists that often obscure the morning light. To the Maya, the act of creation was not distant from human experience. It was felt, lived, and reenacted in ritual. The earliest records of these myths were not written during the height of the Mayan civilization, but preserved much later in the colonial period. The Popol Vuh itself was written in the Quiche language using Latin script in the early part of the 16th century, likely between the years 1550 and 1580, by an anonymous indigenous author. It was then preserved by Dominican friars, such as Francisco Jimenez, who translated it into Spanish in the early 1700s. Although the Popol Vuh was written centuries after the classic period of Maya civilization, which lasted from roughly 250 to 900 CE, it is widely considered to contain stories and beliefs with roots much older, passed down through oral tradition for generations. These were not myths created after the fall of the cities. They were myths that helped build them. The role of the gods in this early creation phase was not just to bring forth physical matter, it was to create meaning and structure. They set in place the divine order that would govern the stars, seasons, and rituals. This divine order later informed the development of the Mayan calendar systems, which operated with incredible precision and complexity. The Tzolk'in, a sacred 260-day cycle, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, were used together to track time not just for agriculture, but for ceremonies, wars, and coronations. Later, the long count calendar allowed the Maya to calculate and record dates across spans of thousands of years. All of these systems were grounded in the belief that time itself had been created by the gods. In Mayan belief, creation was not an act of perfection, it was an experiment. The gods attempted several creations before succeeding, but even in this first phase, the emergence from the void, they laid the groundwork for everything that would follow. The structure of the universe was set. The gods were named. The cosmic balance was initiated, and human beings, though not yet present, had a place in the divine plan. After shaping the sky and the earth from the silence of the void, the gods turned their attention to their most ambitious task, creating human beings. For the ancient Maya, this was not a single moment of divine perfection, but a process marked by failure, destruction, and eventual success. The creation of humans was not just about forming physical bodies. It was about building beings who could honor the gods, uphold cosmic balance, and carry forward the sacred responsibilities tied to time, nature, and the heavens. The Popol Vuh, the sacred narrative of the Quiché Maya, provides the clearest account of this sequence of creation attempts. The gods, having created the world itself, needed stewards, intelligent life that could speak, offer prayer, and perform rituals. The first humans were made from mud. The idea was simple: take the earth's raw material and mold it into life. These mud people were soft and shapeless. They could not hold themselves together. They could not speak. They dissolved easily in water. The gods abandoned them. This first attempt was a failure, but the gods did not give up. They tried again, this time using wood. The wooden people were more durable. They could walk, speak, and multiply, but they had no souls. They had no understanding. They showed no gratitude to their creators. They did not honor the gods or remember the sacred forces that gave them life. Because of this, the gods grew angry. In response, the wooden people were destroyed in a great catastrophe. The earth turned against them. Their own animals, their tools, and even their houses rose up in rebellion. According to the Popol Vuh, they were beaten and chased. Their dogs and turkeys spoke to them. Their griddles and cooking pots broke them. These were not just punishments. They were signs that a world without respect for the divine would collapse from within. This second failure is significant. It reveals the values embedded in Maya cosmology. To be human was not merely to have shape or function. True humanity required reverence, memory, and purpose. The gods were not interested in creating a species that could survive. They wanted a people who could participate in the sacred order of the universe. The destruction of the wooden people also introduced a recurring theme in Mayan myth: cycles of creation and destruction. The Maya did not believe in a linear progression from chaos to order. Instead, they saw time as a series of ages or worlds, each with its own creation, destruction, and renewal. These cycles were echoed in their calendar systems and in their rituals. The story of the wooden people was remembered not just as a warning, but as a part of the divine record, an earlier era, a failed age that preceded the current one. Following this disaster, the gods consulted again. They needed a material that could support life, provide nourishment, and symbolize sacred continuity. That material was maize. Known as ixim in many Mayan languages, maize was not simply food. It was the essence of life itself. It sustained the people physically and spiritually. It grew in cycles that mirrored human existence: birth, growth, death, and rebirth. Maize was also tied to the sun, rain, and the underworld. It represented the unity of the three cosmic realms. So, the gods created the third version of humanity from maize dough. The result was a success. These new beings were strong, intelligent, and grateful. They could speak. They remembered their creators. They gave thanks. In the words of the Popol Vuh, truly they were admirable people. Their bodies were made with yellow corn and white corn. These are the foods from which humans were made. The first four men were named Balam Kitse, Balamakab, Mahukuta, and Iki Balam. They were not just ancestors in the story. They were prototypes, models of what humans were meant to be. With the creation of these maize people, the relationship between humanity and the gods was established. Humans would depend on the gods for rain, sun, and sustenance. In return, they would honor the gods with rituals, offerings, and respect. This reciprocal relationship was central to Mayan religious practice for centuries. Even daily farming practices were tied to cosmic events and divine patterns. Planting maize was not just agriculture, it was participation in the divine. The significance of maize also appeared in art and architecture. In Mayan carvings and murals, the maize god is depicted as youthful, often emerging from the earth or from a turtle shell, symbolizing rebirth. His image is sometimes linked with the hero twins, who also play a central role in myths of life, death, and resurrection. Temples and ceremonial centers were often aligned with astronomical events that marked the agricultural calendar: solstices, equinoxes, and zenith Sundays. The entire civilization was structured around the rhythm of the maize cycle. The idea that humans were made from maize also shaped Mayan burial practices. Corn kernels were sometimes placed in the mouths of the dead, symbolizing rebirth. Rituals often included offerings of tamales or atole, maize-based foods, to the gods. The cycle of planting, harvesting, and replanting became both a spiritual and a practical guide to life and death. This myth of creation also reinforces the Mayan understanding of responsibility. To be human was to be aware of one's place in the world, not just in the physical environment, but in the cosmic structure. The story of the failed mud and wood people remained as a reminder of what happens when that responsibility is ignored. It was a moral and religious foundation. Historically, the reverence for maize and its divine connection can be traced archaeologically. Evidence of maize cultivation in Mesoamerica dates back over 9,000 years. By the time of the Olmecs, often considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica, active from around 1500 to 400 BCE, maize had already become central to ritual and diet. The Maya inherited and deepened this sacred relationship. In the Classic period, from roughly 250 to 900 CE, maize deities were depicted in the most important city-states, from Tikal in modern-day Guatemala to Copan in Honduras. The agricultural year was divided by rituals. The Chachak ceremonies called upon rain gods to bring water for the crops. The start of the planting season was marked by festivals, music, and offerings. In some regions, children were sprinkled with water to invoke rain. All of this was rooted in the belief that maize was not only a crop, it was a divine gift that carried the spirit of humanity. It is also worth noting that the myth of humans made from maize is not unique to the Quiche Maya. Variations of this theme appear in other Mesoamerican cultures, including the Yucatec and the Tzotzil Maya. This suggests a widespread belief across the region, passed down and adapted through generations and across linguistic groups. With the successful creation of human beings from maize, the world had taken its form. But the story of Mayan mythology was not yet complete. One of its most important episodes was still to unfold, a myth that not only explained the workings of life and death, but also offered a model of justice, resilience, and transformation. At the center of this narrative are two young brothers whose deeds would echo through generations, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. This section of the Popol Vuh is perhaps the most widely known and studied part of Mayan mythology. It tells the story of how these twins descended into the underworld, outwitted the gods of death, and restored balance to the cosmos. Unlike the previous tales of creation, which were focused on the gods' attempts to shape humanity, this narrative focuses on divine action within a mythic history. It introduces new characters, deepens the concept of the underworld, and provides lessons about courage, sacrifice, and the cleverness needed to survive a dangerous world. The story begins before the twins themselves are born. It starts with their father, Hunhunappu, and his brother, Vucubhunappu. These two brothers were skilled ball players who played the sacred ball game with great enthusiasm. However, their playing disturbed the lords of Xibalba, the underworld, who were annoyed by the noise. Xibalba, in Mayan belief, was not just a place of death. It was a complex, dangerous realm governed by a council of death gods. These included One Death and Seven Death, the chief lords, along with a host of others whose names reflected their powers, gods of bone, pus, filth, and decay. Angered by the noise, the lords of Xibalba summoned Hunhunappu and Vucubhunappu to the underworld under the pretense of a friendly ball game. But it was a trap. Upon arrival, the brothers were humiliated, subjected to deadly trials, and eventually sacrificed. Hunhunappu's head was placed in a calabash tree, where it continued to speak. One day, a young maiden named Exquich, daughter of one of the Xibalban lords, passed by the tree. Curious about the strange fruit growing on it, she approached. Hunhunappu's voice called out to her and instructed her to extend her hand. When she did, he spat into her palm, miraculously causing her to conceive. From this supernatural union, the hero twins were born. Exquich fled the underworld and raised her sons in the world above, away from the knowledge of their divine origins. Hunappu and Exbalanque grew up in humble circumstances, yet their abilities quickly set them apart. They were clever, strong, and resourceful. From a young age, they played tricks on their older half-brothers, transforming themselves into animals and performing feats of magic. Their talents were not limited to physical strength. They also showed great wisdom and creativity. As the twins matured, their destiny drew them back toward Xibalba. They too became skilled ball players, and like their father and uncle before them, they disturbed the lords of the underworld. Again, an invitation arrived from Xibalba. This time, however, the outcome would be different. The journey into the underworld was not a simple descent. The twins had to pass through a series of deadly houses, each one a trap designed to destroy them. These included the House of Gloom, the House of Knives, the House of Cold, the House of Jaguars, the House of Fire, and the House of Bats. In each, the lords of Xibalba hoped to kill the twins through deception and terror. But the twins used cleverness and cooperation to survive. For example, in the House of Knives, they charmed the blades so they would not attack. In the House of Bats, they hid inside their blowguns, though one of them nearly died when he peeked out too soon. Eventually, the hero twins were captured and sacrificed by the lords. But this, too, was part of their plan. Their bodies were ground into powder and thrown into the river. From this river, they were reborn, first as catfish, then as two traveling dancers with magical powers. They disguised themselves, performed miraculous acts, and became famous in the underworld for their performances. The lords of Xibalba, fascinated by the twins' abilities, invited them to perform. In their most astonishing feat, the disguised twins sacrificed one another and then brought each other back to life. The lords, amazed and perhaps a bit arrogant, asked for the same treatment. The twins agreed, only to kill the lords of Xibalba and not revive them. This act marked the triumph of life over death. The hero twins had not only defeated the gods of the underworld, they had undone the authority of death itself. After this victory, they revealed their true identities. They rose to the heavens, where they became celestial bodies. Depending on the version of the story, they are associated with the sun and the moon, or with the planet Venus. Their victory brought balance to the cosmos and helped set the order of the world as the Maya understood it. This myth served several important purposes in Mayan thought. First, It offered an explanation for the dangers and mysteries of death. Xibalba was not a simple afterlife, but a place of trials, traps, and decisions. It was a realm that tested one's character and intelligence. Second, the myth highlighted the importance of cleverness and humility. The twins did not succeed through brute force alone. They won through wisdom, patience, and teamwork. Third, the story justified the importance of the ball game in Maya culture. The Paktapak or ball game was not just sport. It was a ritual reenactment of cosmic struggles. The ball court symbolized the space between the worlds of the living and the dead. When players stepped onto the court, they were not only honoring the gods, they were participating in the sacred cycle of challenge and rebirth. Archaeological evidence supports the deep cultural importance of this story. Ball courts have been found in nearly every major Maya site, often placed near temples or royal structures. Carvings at sites like Copan and Chichen Itza depict scenes of ball players, sometimes even showing decapitations, linking the mythic with the ceremonial. The hero twins themselves appear in art across the Maya world, from pottery and murals to carved monuments. The story also offered hope. In a world full of hardship, floods, droughts, warfare, the myth of the hero twins reminded people that even in the darkest depths, courage and wisdom could prevail. Death was powerful, but it was not absolute. The sun would rise again. The harvest would return. The gods could be challenged, not through rebellion, but through cleverness and virtue. As their story came to a close, the hero twins did not stay on Earth. Their journey ended in the sky. Their ascension marked a shift from mythic history to celestial order. With them now among the stars, the Maya could look to the heavens not just for timekeeping and astrology, but for inspiration. The hero twins' triumph over the lords of Xibalba was not the end of their story. It marked a transition, a bridge between mythic time and the cosmic order that governed the world of the living. Having passed through death and returned, the hero twins did not remain on Earth. Instead, they ascended. Their journey concluded in the sky, where they were transformed into celestial bodies. This transformation served as both an explanation for the movements of heavenly objects and a sacred anchor for the Maya's understanding of time and destiny. According to various Mayan traditions, Hunahpu and Xbalanque were placed in the sky as the sun and the moon, or in other versions, as the sun and the morning star, identified by the Maya as Venus. Their transformation was not only symbolic of rebirth, but also cosmic synchronization. In their celestial forms, they would continue to influence the world, rising and setting in predictable patterns that became vital markers of sacred time. The idea of celestial bodies as divine or ancestral beings was widespread across Mesoamerican cultures. For the Maya, this belief held particular power. The movement of the stars, planets, and sun were not merely natural phenomena. They were the actions of gods and heroes, each movement infused with significance. The hero twins' ascension embedded their legacy into the daily lives of the Maya, where astronomy, agriculture, ritual, and governance all depended on the accurate reading of celestial events. This cosmological turning point was also associated with the beginning of a new era, what is often referred to as the fifth sun or the current world age. In Mayan tradition, time was cyclical and the universe had been created and destroyed multiple times. Each age or sun had its own characteristics and fate. While the term fifth sun is more explicitly detailed in Aztec mythology, the concept of successive creations leading to the present era was also present in Mayan cosmology, especially through the long count calendar system. The long count calendar was developed to record vast spans of time, far exceeding a human lifespan. It tracked great cycles known as baktuns, each lasting roughly 400 solar years. According to inscriptions found on monuments such as the one at Tortuguero and others in Copan and Quirigua, the current era, the one inhabited by the Maize people created in the last section, began on a date that corresponds to August the 11th, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar. This date marked the beginning of the current creation, the world in which the hero twins ascended, and the gods finalized the order of time. From that moment onward, human history was integrated into the sacred timeline. Every ritual, every dynastic event, every act of planting or sacrifice was aligned with this cosmic framework. The Maya were not passive observers of the stars, they were interpreters. They studied the sky to determine the timing of religious festivals, agricultural cycles, royal ceremonies, and even warfare. The Venus cycle, in particular, was of enormous importance. Because Venus appears both as the morning star and the evening star, it seemed to rise, disappear, and return in predictable phases. The Maya tracked this cycle with incredible precision and associated its appearances with omens and divine activity. The link between Venus and the hero twins, particularly the aspect of Hunahpu, is a reflection of how myth, astronomy, and daily life were interwoven. One of the best preserved records of these celestial observations can be found in the Dresden Codex, a pre-Columbian Mayan manuscript believed to have been created in the post-classic period, possibly between the 11th and 12th centuries CE. This codex contains detailed tables tracking the movements of Venus, eclipses, and other astronomical phenomena. While the Dresden Codex was written long after the hero twins myth was first told, it reflects the same principles: divine beings in the sky, their movements interpreted as messages from the gods. The hero twins' victory and ascension also had political consequences. Rulers across the Maya world claimed descent from these mythic figures or drew symbolic connections to them. To associate oneself with the hero twins was to claim divine favor, legitimacy, and a cosmic role in maintaining balance. Inscriptions from royal courts often included references to mythic time, with rulers participating in rituals that mirrored the trials and triumphs of the twins. These acts were not just displays of power, they were sacred performances meant to renew the cosmos and affirm human alignment with divine patterns. Another layer of meaning in the hero twins' story is their role in reshaping the underworld. By defeating the lords of Xibalba, they did not destroy the underworld, but they weakened its hold on the living. Their actions introduced a new kind of afterlife logic. Death was no longer absolute. Rebirth was possible, and through ritual, the living could maintain contact with the dead. This idea became foundational to Maya spiritual life. Ancestor veneration, funerary practices, and ceremonial offerings were all built upon the belief that the realms of the living and the dead were connected, linked through sacrifice, memory, and celestial pathways. The twins' resurrection also reaffirmed the importance of duality. They were not a single hero, but a pair. This theme of duality, light and dark, life and death, sun and moon, was central to Mayan philosophy. Balance rather than dominance was the goal. In this way, the hero twins did not simply conquer death, they harmonized it with life. Their story also introduced an important lesson in humility and cunning. The twins succeeded not by brute strength, but by outwitting the gods of the underworld. Their cleverness allowed them to survive traps, avoid deception, and ultimately triumph. This narrative celebrated intelligence and resilience, values that were held in high regard in Maya society. Although their tale is mythical, the hero twins shaped the very structure of Maya life. Their names appear in texts, their images in art, their deeds echoed in rituals. They represented the possibility of transformation, that from suffering could come victory, and from death, renewal. In the world of the ancient Maya, time was not an abstract concept. It was sacred, structured, and alive. The Maya believed time had a will of its own, cycles that moved not in a straight line, but in repeating, patterned loops. Each day carried with it a distinct energy, shaped by the gods and connected to historical and cosmic events. Time could be auspicious or dangerous. It could open portals between worlds, or mark the moment for kings to rise and wars to begin. To track and understand this sacred rhythm, the Maya developed one of the most advanced and complex calendrical systems in the ancient world. Far more than a means of counting days, the Mayan calendar was a spiritual map, an intricate structure rooted in mythology, astronomy, and mathematics. It offered a way to interpret not just when events occurred, but why they occurred and how they were connected to the cosmic order established by the gods. The calendar system was not a single unified instrument. It consisted of multiple overlapping cycles, each serving a different purpose. The two primary cycles were the Tzolk'in and the Hab, which together formed a larger unit known as the calendar round. Later, the long count was developed to extend timekeeping over vast spans, reaching back into mythic origins and projecting forward across millennia. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day cycle, composed of 20 day names combined with 13 numbers. Each day was uniquely defined by its pairing of a number and a name, such as 8 Bin or 13 Khan. The origin of the 260-day cycle remains a topic of scholarly debate. Some propose it was based on agricultural patterns, others on the human gestation period. Regardless of its origin, the Tzolk'in governed the ceremonial life of the Maya. Birth dates, naming ceremonies, and divination rituals were all calculated according to this sacred cycle. Each Tzolk'in day carried spiritual significance. Certain days were considered favorable for planting, others for sacrifice or prophecy. Daykeepers, trained in calendrical knowledge, were responsible for interpreting these energies and guiding community decisions. In many regions, they are still active today, continuing traditions of calendrical wisdom that have endured for over 1,000 years. The Hab was the solar calendar, more closely aligned with the agricultural year. It consisted of 18 months, each with 20 days, followed by a short period of 5 additional days called Wayeb. These final 5 days were considered ominous, a liminal time when the boundaries between the worlds of the living and the supernatural were thin. During Wayeb, people avoided travel, major decisions, and dangerous activities. The rituals performed during these days were meant to protect households and reaffirm harmony. When the Tzolk'in and Hab cycles were combined, they created a repeating pattern of 18,980 days, approximately 52 solar years. This period was known as the calendar round. A specific combination of a Tzolk'in and Hab date would not repeat until the completion of this 52-year cycle. This made calendar round dates significant for marking generational milestones, dynastic events, and anniversaries of sacred importance. However, the Maya were not satisfied with merely tracking 52-year intervals. They believed that time stretched back into the mythological past, far before human memory, and extended far into the future. To record such long spans, they developed the long count calendar. The long count was based on a vigesimal, base 20 system, with one notable exception in its structure. It recorded time in units of kin, 1 day, Wainal, 20 days, Tun, 360 days, Ka'atun, 7,200 days, and Baktun, 144,000 days. Through this system, the Maya were able to assign exact dates to mythological events, such as the beginning of the current era, which they placed at a point corresponding to August the 11th, 3114 BCE in the modern calendar. Inscriptions using the long count appear on stelae, altars, and temple walls across the Maya region. These inscriptions recorded the dates of royal accessions, victories, temple dedications, and celestial events. They grounded historical acts within a larger mythic timeline, connecting kings and cities to the will of the gods and the rhythms of the universe. One of the most famous examples of this system in use can be found at Copan in present-day Honduras. There, the hieroglyphic stairway records a dynastic history stretching over centuries, with precise long-count dates anchoring each event. Similarly, at Tikal, Quirigua, and Palenque, rulers used these calendars to inscribe their place in sacred history. The Mayan system of timekeeping was not isolated from other aspects of society. It was deeply embedded in religion, politics, and science. Priests were often astronomers, tasked with observing the skies to ensure the calendar remained in harmony with celestial movements. The sun's position, phases of the moon, and the visibility of Venus were all used to align rituals and predict events. Buildings were often constructed to mark specific solar positions, such as equinoxes or zenith sun days, so that the sun's light would fall precisely through temple doorways or illuminate carvings on specific dates. These alignments were not aesthetic, they were functional expressions of cosmic order. The temple became a clock, the city a calendar. Rituals performed at these sites were not just acts of devotion, but acts of cosmic renewal, designed to maintain balance between the human world and the divine. The spiritual weight of time can also be seen in the concept of Khatun prophecy. Each 20-year period, or Khatun, was believed to carry specific characteristics. Maya scribes recorded these patterns and used them to predict the mood or fate of future periods. For example, one Khatun might be associated with drought and war, while another with fertility and abundance. This cyclical view of history meant that the past was never truly gone. Its patterns could return, and the wise could prepare for what was to come. This depth of foresight and structure often surprises modern audiences. In the early 21st century, public attention was briefly drawn to the Mayan calendar when the 13th Baktun ended in December of 2012. Some popular interpretations suggested the Maya had predicted the end of the world. In reality, no such prophecy existed in Maya sources. The completion of a Baktun was not a signal of doom, but a time of renewal and reflection, a moment when the cosmic clock reset and began again, just as it had countless times before. Indeed, this misunderstanding highlights the contrast between linear and cyclical perceptions of time. Western traditions often see time as a straight line, moving from past to future with no return. The Maya, however, saw time as circular and sacred. Each cycle was an opportunity to restore balance, to learn from the past, and to participate in the divine. The legacy of Mayan timekeeping continues to this day. In regions of Guatemala, Chiapas, and the Yucatan, traditional calendar keepers still guide communities through the Tzolk'in. They interpret signs, lead ceremonies, and maintain a living link to the ancient understanding of sacred time. At the heart of Mayan mythology stood a complex and interwoven pantheon of gods, each representing vital forces of nature, cosmic cycles, and human experience. These deities were not distant figures occupying a separate spiritual realm. They were active participants in the natural world. Rainfall, crop growth, illness, childbirth, eclipses, and even warfare were seen as manifestations of divine will. The Maya believed the gods needed to be honored, understood, and, at times, appeased. Each god had specific attributes, stories, responsibilities, and connections to time and place. Understanding this pantheon reveals how deeply mythological thought influenced everyday life. Unlike in some religious systems where gods were clearly ranked or organized into a strict hierarchy, the Mayan pantheon was fluid. Many gods existed in multiple forms or aspects, appearing differently depending on region, time period, or ritual context. Some gods were male, others female, and several could shift between genders. Many embodied dualities, life and death, creation and destruction, order and chaos. One of the most significant deities in the Mayan cosmos was Itzamna, often considered a creator god and a patron of wisdom, writing, and the calendar. In some traditions, Itzamna was believed to be the son of Hunab-Ku, a high god more commonly referenced in later Yucatec sources. Itzamna was frequently associated with the sky and was sometimes depicted as an old man with a toothless mouth and large, thoughtful eyes. As a god of knowledge, Itzamna was credited with the invention of writing and the development of science and ritual. He was deeply connected to the priestly class and was often invoked in ceremonies related to healing and divination. Complementing Itzamna was Ixchel, one of the most important female deities in the pantheon. She was the goddess of the moon, fertility, childbirth, healing, and weaving. Like many Mayan gods, she had both creative and destructive aspects. While she was revered as a nurturing figure, she also had associations with floods and storms. In artistic depictions, she often appeared as an aged woman pouring water from a vessel, symbolizing rain and its life-giving properties. Ixchel was especially venerated by women and midwives, and pilgrimage centers such as the island of Cozumel were dedicated to her worship during the post-classic period. Another central figure was Chak, the god of rain and storms. Given the importance of agriculture and especially maize in the Maya world, Chak held a crucial role. He was depicted with reptilian features, fangs, and often carried an axe, which he used to strike the clouds and release rain. In some traditions, there were 4 Chaks, each representing one of the cardinal directions and associated with different colors: red for east, white for north, black for west, and yellow for south. These directional deities helped maintain balance across the landscape and were invoked during agricultural ceremonies to ensure favorable rains and good harvests. The maize itself was personified as a deity known as the maize god, a youthful and elegant figure symbolizing life, renewal, and abundance. His story paralleled the seasonal cycles of planting and harvest. In many myths, the maize god journeys into the underworld and is resurrected, echoing the process of death and rebirth that maize undergoes each year. He was frequently represented in art as a handsome youth with a head shaped like an ear of corn, often emerging from a turtle shell or earth, which symbolized rebirth from the underworld. The maize god was not just a representation of food, but of human existence itself, closely tied to themes of sacrifice, fertility, and cosmic renewal. The underworld was ruled by fearsome gods known as the Lords of Xibalba, already encountered in the myths of the hero twins. The chief lords were 1 Death and 7 Death, but they were accompanied by numerous others who personified decay, disease, suffering, and death. These gods played a dual role. While they were seen as dangerous and malevolent, they were also necessary figures in the cosmic balance. Death was not viewed as evil, but as part of the natural order. Offerings to these gods were made to ensure safe passage to the afterlife and to prevent misfortune from befalling the living. The Maya also revered Apuch, a skeletal god of death often associated with the smell of decomposition and the darkness of the grave. He was sometimes depicted with bells and wore skulls as ornaments. His presence in ritual art signaled themes of mortality and transition, reminding the living of their inevitable fate and the need for spiritual preparation. In the domain of warfare and protection, the god Ekchuaj held particular importance. He was a patron of warriors and merchants and was associated with cacao, a highly valued commodity in Mayan society. Often shown carrying a bundle or wielding weapons, Ekchuaj was a guardian of trade routes and marketplaces. His favor was sought not only for success in battle, but for safe and profitable journeys across the region. Another significant deity was Kawil, a god of lightning, serpents, and royal lineage. He is easily recognized in Maya iconography by the serpent emerging from his forehead or leg and the smoking mirror embedded in his body. Kawil was closely tied to kingship and was often depicted in the hands of rulers during rituals of accession or lineage declaration. Through Kawil, rulers claimed divine right to power and legitimacy as chosen by the gods. The sun itself was personified in the god Kinich Ahau, a deity of warmth, vision, and ruling energy. Kinich Ahau was often portrayed as a robust figure with a square-shaped face, sometimes with crossed eyes and jaguar features, signs of elite beauty in Maya aesthetics. The sun god was a daily reminder of cosmic order, crossing the sky and descending into the underworld each night. His journey was seen as both a source of life and a symbol of the cycle of death and rebirth. In addition to these major deities, the Maya recognized countless lesser spirits, local gods, and supernatural beings. These included Aluxes, small spirit beings that inhabited caves, forests, and fields. Resembling children, Aluxes were thought to be protectors of nature and often required offerings or ritual communication, especially when building new structures or clearing land. Caves, mountains, and cenotes were believed to be entrances to the underworld and the dwelling places of gods and ancestors. Natural features of the landscape were not merely geological, they were mythologically alive. A mountain might be seen as the body of a god, a cave as the mouth to the underworld, or a river as the path between realms. This animistic view of nature infused the entire Mayan environment with spiritual meaning. The Mayan pantheon reflected the complexities of the world as the Maya experienced it. Harsh and beautiful, predictable and mysterious, filled with danger but also with abundance. Their gods were not separate from the world, they were the world, present in its forces, rhythms, and mysteries. Religious ceremonies, offerings, and temple constructions were all means of maintaining communication with these divine forces. Priests acted as intermediaries, interpreting divine will, conducting sacrifices, and reading omens in smoke, dreams, and celestial alignments. To understand Mayan mythology fully, one must look beyond the stories of gods and heroes and examine how the Maya envisioned the universe itself. At the center of their worldview stood a powerful and unifying symbol, the world tree, a cosmic axis that connected the sky above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld below. This tree, also known as the Ceiba tree, was not just a metaphor. It represented the structure of all existence, anchoring the three realms of the Mayan cosmos and sustaining the constant flow of spiritual energy between them. The concept of a three-part universe was not unique to the Maya, but the way they expressed it, through architecture, ceremony, and myth, was distinct and highly sophisticated. The Maya believed that the universe was arranged vertically in layers. The upper world, or sky realm, was the home of celestial deities, stars, the sun, the moon, and planets such as Venus. The middle world was the terrestrial plane, the world of humans, animals, and natural landscapes. The underworld, known as Xibalba, was a dark and complex realm inhabited by gods of death, ancestors, and supernatural creatures. Each of these realms was populated with divine forces and spiritual beings, and each had its own governing laws and cycles. What made the Mayan cosmos unique was the idea that these three realms were constantly in interaction. Life, death, growth, and decay all flowed through them in an eternal loop. The world tree was the conduit for this movement, its roots anchored in Xibalba, its trunk spanning the middle world, and its branches reaching into the heavens. The Ceiba tree, sacred throughout the Maya region, symbolized this cosmic connection. Known for its tall, straight trunk and wide-spreading limbs, the Ceiba could grow to great heights, making it a natural candidate for the world tree in the Mayan imagination. In both oral tradition and artistic representation, the Ceiba was shown linking the realms and marking the center of the universe, the axis mundi. In Mayan art, the world tree often appears in the form of a cross-like structure with stylized branches extending in the cardinal directions. At its center sits a bird deity, usually representing the sky or a celestial ruler. This is not to be confused with the Christian cross. Though the shape may appear similar, its symbolism is entirely rooted in pre-Columbian cosmology. The four limbs of the tree correspond to the four cardinal directions, each associated with a specific color, god, and aspect of life. East was linked to the color red and symbolized beginnings, birth, and the rising sun. West was associated with the color black, endings, death, and the setting sun. North was white and often connected to ancestors and the cold. South was yellow, representing warmth, fertility, and growth. At the center of these directions was the green Ceiba tree itself, representing balance and the life force that binds the universe. This spatial organization was mirrored in Mayan cities and ceremonial centers. Temples, plazas, and pyramids were designed with cosmic geography in mind. Major structures were aligned to celestial events, and their layouts often reflected the sacred order of the universe. For example, many ball courts were placed between temples that symbolized the heavens and shrines representing the underworld. The ball game played within these courts became a dramatization of cosmic struggle, a reenactment of the journey between life and death. Mayan ceremonial centers such as Palenque, Copan, and Yaxchilan contain inscriptions and art that reflect this cosmological structure. One particularly famous example comes from the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, where the tomb of King Pakal the Great lies beneath a carved sarcophagus lid. This lid famously depicts the king falling, or perhaps rising, along the axis of the world tree, positioned between the jaws of the underworld and the celestial bird above. The image illustrates the belief in royal transformation and the king's journey between worlds. The world tree was not the only structure connecting the realms. Caves, mountains, and cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with water, were also seen as portals. Caves led to Xibalba, and rituals performed within them often involved communication with the dead or the gods of the underworld. Mountains were sacred as places where sky met earth, locations of divine insight and offerings. Cenotes, particularly in the Yucatan region, were revered as water-filled thresholds to the underworld. Archaeologists have found offerings of pottery, jade, and even human remains in these watery depths, placed there to communicate with the gods below. Just as the world tree joined vertical realms, sacred geography unified space on a horizontal level. The Maya saw the landscape as a living grid, with cities and regions occupying positions within a divine map. Every direction was not just a point on a compass, but a place of spiritual meaning. Gods resided in these directions, and rituals were oriented to honor their influence. This belief system made its way into daily life. Homes were often oriented according to cosmological principles. Shrines were placed to align with east or west, and certain days of the calendar were tied to specific directions and the deities who ruled over them. This alignment between human structures and divine design was a way of living in harmony with the universe, a constant reaffirmation of balance. The idea of movement between realms also informed the Mayan understanding of death. Death was not the end, but a passage. The soul traveled through the underworld, undergoing trials and challenges much like the hero twins in earlier myths. The outcome depended on one's deeds in life, the timing of one's death, and the rituals performed by the living. Through proper burial, offerings, and ceremonies, the journey of the soul could be eased and even transformed. Importantly, the underworld was not a place of eternal punishment. While dangerous and difficult, it was necessary for the renewal of life. Seeds were planted in the ground, and from that darkness, maize would grow. The sun set each night into the underworld, only to rise again. This cyclical passage between death and life mirrored the journey through the realms. The gods, too, moved between worlds, just as humans did. In this layered and interconnected cosmos, balance was the key. The world tree symbolized that balance, not a separation of realms, but their integration. Life flowed from one realm to another, and rituals helped maintain the connections. Every festival, every sacrifice, every act of reverence was a thread in the vast web that held the universe together. The Maya did not see themselves as rulers of the world, but as participants in its sacred structure. Their myths, architecture, rituals, and daily practices all reflected this understanding. By living in alignment with the world tree and the three realms, they believed they could sustain harmony and ensure the renewal of life. The landscape of the ancient Maya world was not seen as a backdrop to mythology. It was an active participant in it. Mountains, caves, rivers, and cenotes were not simply physical features. They were sacred locations where the divine and human worlds intersected. To the Maya, the natural environment was alive with spiritual energy. Every hill might conceal a god, every cave might open into the underworld, and every pool of water might reflect not only the sky, but the realms beyond. This deep relationship between landscape and belief was rooted in cosmology, but manifested in everyday life. The Maya constructed temples atop sacred mountains, performed rituals in caves believed to lead to Xibalba, and offered sacrifices into cenotes that were thought to be mouths of the earth. Through these actions, they kept open the lines of communication with the gods, the ancestors, and the forces that shaped the cycles of time and nature. Among the most sacred features in the Mayan worldview were mountains. These were not merely geological elevations, they were living beings and symbols of creation. In myth, the very earth itself emerged as a sacred mountain rising from the primordial sea. The mountain was seen as the first dry land, the original place of emergence, and therefore the birthplace of life. This concept was reenacted in temple architecture, where pyramids and stepped structures symbolized the sacred mountain. These were not only built for visibility and power, but as representations of mythic geography. One example of this symbolism can be found at Palenque, where the Temple of the Cross Group consists of 3 main temples arranged to reflect cosmic order. Each structure is connected to a sacred narrative involving the city's ruling dynasty and their ties to divine origins. The temples themselves sit atop pyramidal platforms, artificial mountains, placing the human-built world into alignment with the sacred natural world. Mountains were also associated with rain, agriculture, and fertility. Clouds gathered around mountaintops, bringing much-needed precipitation. Because of this, mountains were considered the dwelling places of rain gods and spirits. In the highland regions, especially among the Quiche and Maya, ceremonies are still conducted on mountaintops to call down rain and ensure the success of crops. Equally important in the sacred landscape were caves. In Mayan belief, caves were portals to the underworld, known as Xibalba. These dark subterranean spaces were believed to be entry points into the realm of the dead and the gods of death. Caves were places of origin as well as return. Myths told of ancestors and deities emerging from the earth through sacred caves, and similar stories were passed down orally across different regions of the Maya world. Because of their perceived spiritual power, caves were frequently used for rituals. Archaeologists have discovered elaborate offerings within caves, including ceramics, obsidian blades, jade, and even human remains. These were not discarded or hidden objects. They were deliberate gifts to the gods. Caves like Naj Tunic in Guatemala, Actun Tunichil Muknal in Belize, and Balancanche near Chichen Itza have revealed remarkable evidence of ceremonial activity, including paintings, carved glyphs, and carefully placed artifacts. Cave rituals often involved water, fire, and blood. Priests would conduct ceremonies deep within these natural chambers, using torches to light their way, burning copal incense, and invoking the gods with spoken prayers. The darkness of the cave mirrored the darkness of the womb and the tomb, making it a perfect setting for rites of passage, fertility, and transition. These spaces were silent, otherworldly, and spiritually charged. Another key feature of sacred geography was the cenote, especially in the limestone-rich Yucatan Peninsula, where surface rivers are scarce. Cenotes are natural sinkholes formed when the roof of a subterranean cavern collapses, exposing the groundwater below. To the ancient Maya, these water-filled chasms were sacred. Like caves, they were entrances to the underworld, but they also held the element of water, which was both life-giving and spiritually potent. Some of the most famous cenotes used for ritual purposes are located at Chichen Itza, particularly the sacred cenote, which served as a major pilgrimage site during the post-classic period. Spanish chroniclers recorded tales of human sacrifices being offered to the gods by casting victims into the cenote, along with offerings of gold, jade, and other valuables. Excavations in the early 20th century confirmed these accounts, uncovering human bones, ceremonial objects, and artifacts from across Mesoamerica. The water of the cenotes was more than a physical resource. It was a mirror of the sky and a medium through which the divine could be reached. Water, in general, was considered sacred by the Maya, particularly because it was tied to Chak, the rain god. Seasonal droughts could threaten entire regions, and prayers for rain were essential. Rituals were conducted not only to request water, but to express gratitude for it, to balance human use with divine offering. The connection between water and the sacred extended into the rivers and lakes of the Maya lowlands and highlands. In cities like Yaxchilan and Piedras Negras, built along the banks of the Usumacinta River, rulers used the river as both a transport route and a spiritual symbol. Rivers were seen as dynamic boundaries between realms, flowing paths that echoed the journey of the soul or the sun's passage into the underworld. Ceremonial platforms were often located near water sources, and processions would lead to these points during key rituals. In addition to large-scale sites, the sacredness of the landscape was deeply local. Each community had its own sacred mountain, its own holy cave, its own guardian spring or tree. Ritual knowledge was often passed through generations, with elders, shamans, and priests serving as caretakers of these spiritual geographies. Offerings were tailored to specific places and their associated spirits. A cenote in one region might be tied to a fertility goddess, while a cave in another might belong to a death deity. This localization of myth within the landscape created a richly textured spiritual world. Myth was not confined to books or temples. It lived in the hills, the stones, the shadows. As people moved through the land, they moved through stories. Every feature had a past, a presence, and a meaning. Importantly, the sacred landscape shaped not only religious life, but political life as well. Rulers claimed to communicate with the gods through these places. Temples and palaces were built near or on top of sacred sites to reinforce the authority of kings. Inscriptions often described rulers traveling to caves or mountaintops to perform rituals that would legitimize their rule. These acts were not symbolic. They were essential to maintaining the divine contract between humans and the supernatural. Even today, many modern Maya communities maintain these beliefs. Rituals are still performed in caves, mountains are still climbed in prayer, and water from sacred sources is used in healing and blessing. Despite centuries of colonization, suppression, and cultural transformation, the sacred geography of the Maya world remains alive. In the spiritual and political life of the Maya, kingship was not merely a form of governance, it was a sacred institution rooted in mythology. The ruler, or Ajah, was more than a political leader. He was the living intermediary between the human world and the divine, a figure who performed rituals not only to maintain power, but to uphold cosmic balance. Through myth, bloodline, ceremony, and sacred geography, Maya kings presented themselves as the chosen agents of the gods, born to renew time, nourish the heavens, and ensure the prosperity of their people. The origin of kingship in the Maya world is deeply tied to creation myths and divine heritage. Rulers often claimed descent from mythological ancestors, especially from the hero twins or maize gods, linking their authority to sacred precedent. This connection was not metaphorical. Through ritual and inscription, rulers publicly demonstrated that they were part of a divine lineage chosen by the gods to maintain order on earth. In this framework, kingship itself was viewed as a continuation of divine will. The king became the human embodiment of cosmic forces, and his actions were believed to affect the stability of the universe. Every ceremony he performed, every war he declared, and every temple he built carried sacred meaning. The legitimacy of Maya kings was reinforced through elaborate accession rituals. These ceremonies were often timed according to calendrical cycles, aligning the king's rise with auspicious dates in the sacred calendar. The act of taking the throne was described not simply as a political transition but as a transformation. The new ruler became a conduit for divine power. This was usually marked by the donning of ritual attire that signified the fusion of human and divine identity. Headdresses worn by Maya kings often featured elements associated with gods or powerful animals: jaguars, serpents, birds, and supernatural beings. One common motif was the vision serpent, a symbol of communication with the spirit world. In many depictions, rulers are shown invoking this serpent during ritual bloodletting, from which emerges a divine figure or ancestor. This visual narrative underscores the idea that the king could open a channel between the worlds, bringing divine insight into earthly affairs. Bloodletting itself was a central ritual duty of the Maya king. By drawing his own blood, often from the tongue or genitals, the ruler offered his life force to the gods. This act was seen as both a sacrifice and a demonstration of fitness to rule. It reaffirmed the king's sacred role and his willingness to suffer for the well-being of his people and the universe. One of the clearest expressions of divine kingship is found in the inscriptions and iconography of cities such as Palenque, Copan, and Yaxchilan. In Palenque, the dynastic history of its rulers is tied directly to mythological events. For instance, Kinich Janaab Pakal, also known as Pakal the Great, is depicted not just as a powerful ruler, but as a figure whose lineage stretches back to supernatural ancestors. His tomb, located beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions, features a sarcophagus lid showing him descending into the underworld through the world tree, a visual metaphor for his sacred journey and rebirth as a divine ancestor. In Copan, stele portray Waxaklajun Uba Kawil as a semi-divine being. He stands tall and adorned in ceremonial regalia, holding objects that symbolize both time and cosmic power. His reign was marked by public ceremonies, calendar events, and construction projects meant to align the city with the divine order. Through his actions and inscriptions, he affirmed his role as guardian of sacred time. Yaxchilan offers another rich example through the reign of Shield Jaguar and his wife, Lady Kabal Suk. Carved lintels from the city depict Lady Suk performing bloodletting rituals that summon the vision serpent from which emerges an ancestral spirit. These scenes emphasize that divine authority extended beyond the male ruler to include royal women, who also played critical roles in upholding sacred power. In addition to their ceremonial duties, Maya kings were patrons of monumental architecture. Temples, pyramids, and stelae were not built merely for prestige. They were expressions of divine order on the landscape. Each construction project was a material act of myth-making. Structures were aligned with celestial events, inscribed with calendar dates, and decorated with symbols that reinforced the ruler's cosmic role. By building in harmony with the sacred world, the king anchored his city within the universe. The building process itself was ritualized. Foundational ceremonies often included offerings buried beneath structures, obsidian blades, jade, shells, and sometimes human sacrifices. These acts were intended to consecrate the space, ensure divine favor, and transform stone and mortar into living embodiments of sacred time and place. Kingship also extended to warfare. Battles were not only political contests, they were sacred events, often timed to coincide with specific days on the calendar. Victories were interpreted as signs of divine favor, and captives were used in rituals to affirm the ruler's connection to the gods. These prisoners were often sacrificed in ceremonies reenacting mythological events, turning warfare into a form of sacred theater. The Maya developed a complex system of royal titles and naming conventions to emphasize the sacred dimension of rule. Terms such as Kuhul Ajau, meaning Holy Lord, or Kalumte, a higher title indicating supreme authority, reinforced the idea that the ruler was more than a man. He was a vessel for divine purpose. Names often included references to gods, celestial bodies, or mythic ancestors, further embedding the king within the cosmic narrative. Kingship was also tied to prophecy and long-term planning. Royal scribes and priests used the calendar to project forward, identifying key dates for rituals, wars, or successions. These projections helped legitimize royal action and maintain harmony with the divine will. Rulers who aligned themselves with prophesied cycles gained added legitimacy, presenting their reign as destined or preordained. While kings held supreme power, their rule was not unchecked. They were expected to maintain balance between human society and the divine world. Failure to perform necessary rituals, misalignment with sacred time, or military defeat could all be interpreted as signs that the ruler had lost divine favor. In some cases, rulers who failed in their sacred duties were overthrown or replaced. Their downfall understood not as political failure, but as cosmic imbalance. The collapse or decline of certain Maya city-states was often linked in myth to the failure of kings to uphold their sacred obligations. Droughts, famines, or invasions were interpreted as results of ritual negligence or moral decay at the royal court. Thus, the spiritual responsibility of the king was inseparable from the fate of the kingdom. Even after death, rulers did not lose their sacred role. They became ancestor spirits, dwelling within temples and continuing to influence the living. Their images were carved into stelae, their deeds recorded in glyphs, and their spirits honored in ongoing ceremonies. Ancestor veneration kept the royal line spiritually active and affirmed the continuity of divine kingship across generations. In modern Maya communities, echoes of divine kingship still resonate. Traditional leaders, Ritual specialists and elders often carry out roles that trace back to these ancient patterns, balancing spiritual and communal responsibilities, timing ceremonies with the calendar, and invoking the memory of ancestors in public life. The Maya system of kingship represents one of the most deeply spiritual forms of rulership in ancient history. It was a position of power, but also of burden. The king carried the weight of the cosmos, tasked with maintaining harmony between earth and sky, between the past and the present. His every act was a negotiation between human desire and divine necessity. For the ancient Maya, cities were not built merely for political administration or economic control. Each city was a sacred space, its location chosen through divination, its design aligned with cosmic principles, and its founding legitimized by myth. The story of a city's origin was often intertwined with the divine lineage of its rulers and the sacred geography of the land. These founding myths were not just symbolic narratives. They were essential expressions of identity, history, and spiritual purpose. In the Maya worldview, a city was not simply a collection of buildings. It was a microcosm of the universe. Temples represented sacred mountains, plazas symbolized open cosmic space, and ball courts marked the boundary between life and death. The orientation of streets and ceremonial structures reflected the four cardinal directions, while the central temple or pyramid often served as the axis mundi, the spiritual center of the world, connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. When a new city was founded, its origin was typically marked by a ritual known as the planting of the sacred tree. This act symbolized the establishment of the world tree at the center of the city. The planting, whether literal or represented through a stone monument, signified that the city had been anchored in cosmic space. From this center, power radiated outward in four directions, echoing the sacred structure of the universe. One of the clearest examples of a city grounded in myth is Tikal, one of the most powerful and enduring city-states of the classic period. Located in modern-day Guatemala, Tikal rose to prominence through both military strength and spiritual authority. The rulers of Tikal claimed descent from a founding ancestor associated with the gods. Monumental inscriptions, such as those found on Stela 31, record events that date back to the first centuries of the Common Era. These inscriptions frame Tikal's history as a continuation of sacred time, with each ruler fulfilling the divine mandate initiated by the city's mythical founder. The mythology of Tikal is further reinforced by its urban layout. Major temples such as Temple 1 and Temple 2, which frame the Great Plaza, are aligned with celestial events, including solstices and equinoxes. These structures were not simply tombs or shrines. They were astronomical instruments and mythic statements, linking the deeds of kings with the movements of the sun and stars. Another compelling example is Copan in modern-day Honduras. The city's founder, Yaxcuc is portrayed in inscriptions and iconography as having traveled from the west, possibly from the central lowlands, and established a new dynastic line around the early 5th century. This founding narrative is carefully constructed through glyphic texts linking Yaxcuc to divine legitimacy. His arrival is depicted not as conquest, but as fulfillment of cosmic destiny. Later rulers, especially Waxaclajun Uba Kawil, emphasized this origin story to reinforce their own authority, building massive ceremonial structures such as Temple 11 to narrate their connection to the sacred past. Palenque, another major city-state located in modern-day Chiapas, Mexico, also presented its history through mythic narrative. The rulers of Palenque traced their dynasty to supernatural beings that preceded human time. In the inscriptions of the Temple of the Cross group, events from deep mythological time are presented alongside historical events. The great king Kinich Janab Pakal is shown as a continuation of this divine lineage, enacting rituals that mirror those of his supernatural predecessors. This blending of history and myth legitimized the city's place in the universe and its rulers' authority to govern it. Each Mayan city had its own version of sacred geography and founding mythology. Yaxchilan, a city known for its elaborate carved lintels, emphasized the role of visionary experience and spiritual communication. The royal court often depicted its rulers, including shield jaguar and bird jaguar, participating in ceremonies that connected them to divine ancestors. The founding of the city was reaffirmed through bloodletting rituals and appearances of gods and spirits, seen through the vision serpent. These acts did not just maintain tradition, they recreated the cosmic order on which the city's foundation rested. In the northern Yucatan Peninsula, Uxmal stands out for its architectural and mythical significance. Although fewer inscriptions survive from Uxmal than from other classic cities, later oral traditions and colonial-era documents suggest that the city was founded with supernatural aid. One popular legend tells of a dwarf king, hatched from an egg and raised by a witch, who built the Pyramid of the Magician overnight. Though this tale has folkloric elements, it reflects the persistence of a worldview in which cities are shaped not only by human effort, but by divine intervention. The blending of myth and politics was not unique to individual cities. It was a shared feature of Maya civilization. Across the lowlands and highlands, cities claimed sacred origins, linking their founding to gods, ancestors, or divine migrations. These claims helped unify populations, justify the construction of massive public works, and maintain loyalty to ruling dynasties. Sacred animals also played an important role in city myths. Rulers often associated themselves with animals that carried spiritual and cosmic meaning. Jaguars symbolized strength and the underworld. Serpents represented renewal and divine communication. Birds, especially the quetzal and macaw, were linked to the heavens and royal status. These animals often appeared in names, headdresses, and emblems, reinforcing the ruler's role as a mythic figure and protector of the city. Another element of founding mythology was the stela, large stone monuments inscribed with glyphs and images. These were erected to mark important dates, such as the founding of the city, the accession of a ruler, or the completion of a calendrical cycle. Stelae functioned as public records, religious texts, and works of mythic storytelling. In cities like Quirigua, the stelae reached massive heights, with some weighing dozens of tons. These were not mere historical markers. They were sacred expressions carved into stone, placed in alignment with celestial events and surrounded by ritual activity. Maya cities were often part of broader geopolitical networks, with alliances, rivalries, and shared religious practices. Founding myths helped assert independence or superiority. By claiming a more ancient or more divine origin, a city could present itself as the legitimate center of power. These myths were not static. They evolved as political needs changed. A new ruler might reinterpret a founding narrative to elevate his lineage, or a city might modify its myth to align with a dominant neighbor. The transmission of founding myths was maintained through a combination of oral tradition, ritual performance, and monumental inscription. Priests and scribes played a central role in preserving and adapting these stories, ensuring that each new generation understood their place in the sacred history of their city. In sum, the founding of Mayan cities was never just a political act, it was a spiritual declaration. The city was a living space anchored in myth, a sacred geography that made cosmic order visible and tangible. Through ritual, architecture, and narrative, the Maya brought the universe down to earth, building places where gods walked, ancestors spoke, and kings ruled by divine right. To sustain the cosmic order established by the gods, the Maya believed that human beings had a responsibility not only to live in harmony with nature and time, but to actively maintain the balance of the universe through ritual. Among the most important expressions of this duty were ceremonies of sacrifice, especially those involving blood offerings, which were central to Mayan religious life. These acts were not viewed as barbaric spectacles or political tools, although they could serve political purposes, but as sacred acts of communication, renewal, and reciprocity between the human and divine realms. The Maya held that the gods had given their own blood or life force to create the world and to sustain humanity. In return, humans were expected to offer their own blood in acts of gratitude and obligation. This exchange was not metaphorical. It was direct and literal. Without these offerings, the cycles of the sun, the rain, the harvest, and time itself could falter. The gods needed to be nourished, and the most powerful nourishment was the essence of life itself. Among the various forms of ritual sacrifice practiced by the Maya, auto-sacrifice, or self-bloodletting, was the most common and deeply symbolic. This practice involved individuals, usually nobles, priests, or rulers, offering their own blood through controlled incisions. Common sites for bloodletting included the tongue, earlobes, and genitals, all areas associated with speech, fertility, and sacred power. The blood was often collected on bark paper or cloth, which was then burned so that the offering could rise to the heavens in the form of smoke. These rituals were frequently performed during key calendar dates, political events, or moments of personal transition, such as childbirth or coming of age. In the case of kings, bloodletting affirmed their sacred role. By sacrificing their own blood, they reenacted the sacrifices of the gods and demonstrated their commitment to maintaining divine balance. It was both a personal ordeal and a public statement. The ritual spaces for bloodletting were often elaborately designed and richly symbolic. Carvings from cities like Yaxchilan depict royal women performing bloodletting rites to communicate with divine ancestors. In one famous lintel, Lady Kabal Suk, the wife of Shield Jaguar, pulls a thorn-laden rope through her tongue. The blood from this act is shown summoning the vision serpent, from which an ancestral spirit emerges. This scene is not a story. It is a record of a real ritual act, immortalized in stone. Beyond auto-sacrifice, the Maya also practiced animal and human sacrifice, especially during moments of great cosmic or political significance. Animals such as deer, turkeys, and dogs were frequently offered in both household and temple rituals. Their blood, bones, or bodies were used to consecrate new buildings, mark the changing of calendar cycles, or accompany other ceremonial acts. Human sacrifice, though more rare and reserved for exceptional occasions, held immense religious weight. Victims were often prisoners of war, and their deaths were seen as repaying a cosmic debt. Far from being viewed as criminals or outsiders, these individuals were sometimes treated as representatives of gods or honored ancestors. Their deaths were believed to open doorways between worlds, renew divine energy, and satisfy gods who controlled essential forces like rain, fertility, and the sun. One of the most dramatic forms of human sacrifice was heart extraction, which became more prominent in the post-classic period, particularly among the Maya of the northern Yucatan. The ceremony often took place atop pyramid temples, where a priest would open the chest of the victim and offer the still beating heart to the gods. The body might then be cast down the temple steps or ritually buried. Though such scenes are frequently associated with Aztec rituals, archaeological and historical evidence confirms that similar practices occurred among the Maya, especially at sites like Chichen Itza. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza offers further insight into the intersection of sacrifice, water, and the underworld. As discussed in a previous section, this large natural sinkhole received offerings of gold, jade, and human remains. Spanish chroniclers recorded that victims were thrown into the cenote alive as offerings to the rain god Chac. While some accounts were exaggerated or misunderstood, the presence of ritual deposits at the bottom of the cenote confirms the use of this natural feature as a ceremonial portal to the divine. Another important ritual context for sacrifice was the ball game, a sacred sport played across the Maya world. While the game had many variations and meanings, it was often associated with themes of life, death, and cosmic order. The court itself symbolized the space between worlds, and the game was seen as a reenactment of mythological battles, especially the journey of the hero twins into the underworld. In some cases, captives taken in war were forced to play the game before being sacrificed. Although it is not universally agreed whether the winners or the losers were sacrificed, depending on the region and time period, the game served as both entertainment and religious ritual. Through this performance, the community reaffirmed its connection to the sacred order and the legitimacy of its rulers. The Maya also engaged in offering rituals that did not involve blood. These included the burning of incense, the placement of food, flowers, or jade in sacred locations, and the dedication of crafted objects to temples or natural features. These offerings were often made to thank the gods, seek protection, or sanctify spaces. The materials chosen were not arbitrary. They were selected based on symbolic value. Jade, for example, represented life force and the breath of the gods, while obsidian was associated with the underworld and sacrifice. Architectural offerings also played a key role in sacred renewal. When new temples or buildings were constructed, caches of offerings were buried beneath them. These caches might include miniature figurines, pottery vessels, shells, and even the remains of animals or humans. By placing these items at the foundation, the Maya consecrated the space and established a divine presence within the structure itself. Music and dance were integral components of ritual as well. Drums, flutes, conch shells, and other instruments accompanied chants and movement, transforming ritual space into a living theater of cosmic renewal. Dancers often wore elaborate costumes representing gods or spirits, enacting sacred stories through choreography. These performances were not entertainment in the modern sense. They were ceremonial acts meant to align human action with divine rhythm. Rituals were conducted both in grand public spaces and in private household settings. While royal ceremonies captured the most attention, especially from later historians and archaeologists, rituals were part of daily life for ordinary people as well. Farmers made offerings before planting. Families marked births and deaths with ceremony. Diviners used calendars and ritual tools to interpret signs and guide decisions. The common thread in all of these practices was the belief that the human world was interwoven with the sacred. Rituals were not separate from life. They were life. Every drop of blood, every grain of incense, every spoken prayer reaffirmed the connection between humans and gods. Even today, many Maya communities continue these traditions in adapted forms. Ceremonialists and daykeepers perform rituals to the spirits of the land, the ancestors, and the calendar. Offerings are made at mountaintops, caves, and sacred stones. Through these acts, the spiritual legacy of sacrifice and renewal lives on. In the world of the ancient Maya, war was not simply a political or territorial affair. It was deeply mythological. Warfare was understood as an extension of the sacred drama that governed the universe. Battles between cities mirrored the battles of the gods. Capturing enemies was not just a strategic goal, but a spiritual necessity. Kings who waged war were not only military leaders, they were ritual actors performing a cosmic duty. The Mayan worldview held that the universe was created and sustained through conflict. The gods themselves had fought, died, and resurrected in order to establish the present world order. This fundamental belief that struggle was essential to cosmic balance shaped how the Maya interpreted human conflict. Warfare was a sacred act that reenacted the mythological events of creation, particularly those involving the hero twins and their confrontation with the lords of the underworld. One of the most visible aspects of mythic warfare in Maya society was the practice of ritual capture. Rather than aiming for total destruction, Maya warfare often focused on seizing high-status captives, especially enemy kings, nobles, or warriors of renown. These captives were paraded through the victor's city, displayed in public rituals, and frequently sacrificed in ceremonies that echoed mythological narratives. The importance of ritual capture is reflected in the inscriptions and art of many Maya cities. In Yaxchilan, for example, carvings depict rulers such as bird jaguar presenting bound captives before altars or gods. These scenes are not just records of military victories, they are dramatizations of cosmic conquest. The captive becomes a stand-in for the forces of chaos or the underworld, and his defeat ensures the renewal of sacred order. Likewise, at Tonina, stelae and reliefs show victorious rulers holding captives by the hair or with ropes around their necks. These images reinforce the idea that the king, as the divine agent of his city, had triumphed not just over a political rival, but over cosmic disorder. The act of subduing an enemy was a reenactment of the gods' victories in myth, particularly the defeat of death and darkness. Maya warfare was often timed to coincide with significant calendrical events. battles might be launched on days associated with sacrifice or divine conflict. The capture and sacrifice of prisoners could mark the end of a Khatun or the beginning of a new calendar cycle. In this way, war was embedded in sacred time. Victories were not just opportune, they were destined. Cities such as Dos Pilas and Calakmul used warfare to build legitimacy and mythic status. Inscriptions from Dos Pilas describe its ruler, Balaj Chan Kawil, as a war leader whose actions were guided by divine prophecy and ritual. His victories are dated with precise calendar references, linking his military campaigns to larger cosmic cycles. This pattern is repeated throughout the Maya world. Kings fought not only with weapons, but with myth. The architectural spaces where warfare was remembered were also sacred. Captive stairways, monumental staircases carved with images of prisoners, served as visual records of conquest and as ritual pathways. The best-known example is the hieroglyphic stairway at Copan, which records a dynastic history punctuated by war. The stairs lead to a temple where ceremonies were performed, integrating the narrative of conflict into the daily and ritual life of the city. One of the unique aspects of Maya warfare was the ball game, which often accompanied military events. As discussed earlier, the ball game was a symbolic performance of life and death, with the court representing the liminal space between worlds. In the context of warfare, the game could be used to ritually process captives. Some were made to participate in the game before being sacrificed. This act recalled the trials of the hero twins in the underworld and cast the victims as part of a cosmic narrative. Weapons themselves had symbolic value. The obsidian blades and flint knives used in combat and sacrifice were seen as divine tools. Flint was associated with lightning and with the god Kawil, a deity linked to kingship and war. Thus, the tools of battle were also the instruments of cosmic transformation. Carrying a weapon was akin to wielding sacred energy. Cities aligned themselves with patron gods or mythological figures to further sacralize their conflicts. Some kings took names that invoked powerful deities or ancestral heroes. Others performed rituals before battle to summon divine favor. The act of going to war was always framed within a larger mythological context. It was never merely about human ambition or resource competition. Ritualized displays of power extended beyond the battlefield. The Maya built monuments not only to commemorate victories, but to present themselves as participants in divine drama. Glyphic texts often record that a ruler struck a city or burned a place, using language that echoes mythological creation and destruction. Even the destruction of a rival temple might be seen as resetting sacred space. One interesting aspect of Maya warfare is that it sometimes involved dynastic feuds within the same lineage. These internal conflicts were often cast as cosmic trials, with rival claimants invoking competing mythological justifications for rule. The war between Tikal and Dos Pilas, for example, was a family conflict played out on a cosmic stage. Each side claimed to be the true heir to divine authority, and each used warfare and ritual to prove its legitimacy. Warfare also shaped how the Maya understood the afterlife. Dying in battle or being sacrificed was not seen as tragic, but honorable. Such deaths granted access to special afterlife realms. In some traditions, warriors and sacrificial victims were believed to become stars or to accompany the sun on its journey through the underworld. This belief gave further meaning to ritual combat. It was not the end, but a transformation. Women, while not usually warriors, also participated in the ritual aspects of warfare. Elite women were often involved in ceremonies that followed battles, such as cleansing the temple or invoking ancestors. In some cases, royal women were depicted in ritual scenes involving captives, reinforcing their roles as guardians of divine lineage and cosmic order. Though warfare among the Maya was real and sometimes brutal, it cannot be fully understood through modern notions of violence. Every spear thrown, every city burned, and every prisoner sacrificed was situated within a cosmology that demanded action, balance, and renewal. Warfare was an enactment of the myths that had governed the universe since the beginning of time. The fall of a rival city, then, was not simply a military victory, it was a restoration of harmony. The captured ruler symbolized disorder. His defeat ensured that the divine cycle would continue, that rain would fall, crops would grow, and time would move forward. For the ancient Maya, the sky was not a distant and cold expanse of stars. It was a living realm, populated by gods, ancestors, and cosmic forces. The movements of celestial bodies were not random patterns. They were messages, signs, and reminders of divine order. Through astronomy, the Maya read the heavens not just as scientists, but as theologians. They wove celestial observation into the very fabric of their mythology, calendar systems, and prophecy, creating one of the most advanced sky-watching cultures in the pre-modern world. At the heart of Mayan astronomical tradition was the belief that time and space were interconnected. The positions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars were thought to influence everything on Earth, from the rise and fall of kings to the success of crops and the outcomes of wars. Astronomical knowledge was therefore sacred knowledge. It was preserved and practiced by elite priest astronomers who held positions of great importance within royal courts and ceremonial centers. Among all the celestial bodies, Venus held a special place in the Maya imagination. Known in Mayan texts as Chak-ek, or Great Star, Venus was associated with the god Kukulkan in Yucatec tradition and with the hero twin Hunahpu in the Popol Vuh narrative. Venus was not merely admired for its brightness, it was feared and revered for its predictable but dramatic appearances. The Maya tracked Venus with extraordinary accuracy, observing its cycle as the morning star and the evening star. The time Venus disappeared from the sky, a period known as its inferior conjunction, was seen as a dangerous and liminal phase, a time when cosmic balance was unstable. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian Mayan manuscripts, contains a detailed Venus table that spans hundreds of days. It records the exact intervals of Venus's visibility and disappearance, using this data to forecast significant events such as droughts, wars, or royal accessions. The correlation between Venus's cycle and terrestrial events reveals the deep cosmological connection the Maya perceived between heaven and earth. Another major focus of Mayan astronomy was the sun, whose journey across the sky structured daily life, agriculture, and ritual. The sun god, often associated with Kinichahau, traveled through the sky during the day and entered the underworld at night. His passage was symbolic of the life-death-rebirth cycle that governed all existence. Temples and pyramids were frequently aligned with solar events such as solstices and equinoxes. On specific days of the year, the sun's rays would penetrate through doorways or illuminate carvings in ways that marked cosmic thresholds. One of the most famous examples of solar alignment is at Chichen Itza, where the Temple of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo, produces a remarkable visual effect during the spring and autumn equinoxes. As the sun sets, shadows cast by the stepped edges of the pyramid create the image of a serpent slithering down the side of the temple. This phenomenon reflects not only the Maya's architectural sophistication, but also their belief that the gods were manifest in light, shadow, and motion. The moon, associated with the goddess Ixchel, was also carefully tracked, especially in relation to fertility, water, and tides. The Maya observed lunar cycles and eclipses, noting their influence on human behavior and natural rhythms. Lunar eclipses, in particular, were considered ominous events that required ritual intervention to ward off harmful consequences. In some cases, bloodletting or offerings were made to restore balance after such disruptions. The Maya recognized the Milky Way as a powerful celestial feature, often interpreting it as a cosmic river or the road of souls. During certain times of the year, the Milky Way arcs across the sky in a way that resembles a giant canoe, an image that appears in mythology as the canoe carrying the maize god into the underworld. This interpretation blended mythic narrative with visual astronomy, allowing ritual storytelling to mirror what was seen in the night sky. Star clusters and constellations were also significant, though the Maya did not group stars into the same patterns recognized in Western astronomy. Instead, They formed their own asterisms, often linked to animals, gods, or mythological events. These constellations were incorporated into the calendar and used for divination, guiding decisions about planting, building, and warfare. Eclipses, both solar and lunar, were viewed as moments of cosmic disruption. The Maya believed that during an eclipse, celestial beings such as jaguars or serpents attacked the sun or moon. Rituals were conducted to prevent catastrophe, and communities would gather to make noise, chant prayers, or offer sacrifices. Eclipses were recorded in codices and carved into monuments, treated as key indicators of divine communication. The alignment of structures with celestial events was a key element of Mayan city planning. In sites like Copan, Uxmal, and Tikal, temples were often oriented to specific solar risings or settings, especially during solstices. Observatories, such as the Caracol at Chichen Itza, featured windows and viewing platforms that tracked planetary movements with extraordinary precision. These architectural features turned entire cities into astronomical calendars, where daily life unfolded in synchrony with the heavens. Mayan astronomers were also skilled mathematicians. They used a vigesimal, base 20 counting system and understood the concept of zero long before it was adopted in many other parts of the world. This mathematical knowledge allowed them to create accurate astronomical tables, predict solar and lunar eclipses, and calculate long-term cycles. Their calculations were not only precise, but spiritually significant. Every number carried symbolic weight and was tied to divine forces. Prophecy in Mayan culture was intimately connected to astronomy. The priest astronomers, or Ajay used celestial data to interpret the future, guide royal decisions, and plan major events. Each day in the calendar had a specific energy, and combinations of days were read like omens. These interpretations influenced everything from political alliances to agricultural schedules. Inscriptions from sites like Quirigua and Copan frequently reference celestial events as markers of divine intent. A ruler's accession might be timed with the zenith passage of the sun or the rise of Venus. A predicted eclipse might signal the need for purification or a warning of rebellion. These astronomical signs were not superstition. They were part of a deeply structured worldview in which the heavens communicated the gods' will. The Maya also maintained codices, or sacred books, in which astronomical and ritual knowledge was recorded. Although most of these texts were destroyed during the colonial period, a few survived, including the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, and the Paris Codex. These books contain tables of planetary cycles, almanacs for divination, and guides to ritual practice. Their survival offers a rare glimpse into the sophistication of Maya cosmology and the importance of skywatching in their religious life. Importantly, Mayan astronomy was not confined to the elite. While royal courts employed professional astronomer priests, knowledge of the sky was shared across society. Farmers watched for the Pleiades to mark planting times. Community rituals acknowledged the solstices. Oral tradition passed down celestial lore that remains alive in many Maya-speaking regions today. In the 21st century, modern Maya communities continue to honor the sky. Traditional daykeepers still interpret the calendar in light of celestial movements. Ceremonies are held on mountaintops and at ancient temples to welcome the solstice sun or to acknowledge the rising of Venus. The stars remain guides, not only for planting and ceremony, but for identity and continuity. The Maya turned the sky into a map of myth, a clock of destiny, and a mirror of the sacred. Their ability to read the heavens with both scientific precision and spiritual insight stands as one of the great achievements of ancient civilization. Through their eyes, the universe was alive with meaning, a divine story unfolding every night above them. Within the rich tapestry of Mayan mythology and ceremonial life, women held roles of profound spiritual importance. Though much of the monumental art and glyphic writing in ancient Maya cities emphasized kings, warriors, and male deities, a deeper reading of the evidence reveals that women were neither silent nor absent. In myth, women were creators, healers, guardians of fertility, and powerful mediators between realms. In ritual, they performed sacred acts that sustained both family and cosmos. Far from being marginal, women were central to the spiritual structure of Mayan life. The most prominent female deity in the Mayan pantheon is Ixchel, a complex figure whose attributes span multiple dimensions of existence. She is associated with the moon, fertility, childbirth, weaving, healing, water, and even destruction. Ixchel is often depicted as both a young woman and an old crone, embodying the full cycle of life from birth to death. In some depictions, she pours water from an overturned jar, symbolizing her power over rain and flood. In others, she holds a serpent, a symbol of transformation and divine knowledge. As a moon goddess, Ixchel played a critical role in regulating time, especially in relation to the menstrual cycle and fertility. The Maya closely observed the moon's phases, linking them to the rhythms of the body and the land. Women's ability to give birth was understood as a sacred connection to the divine. Midwives were not only medical practitioners, but also spiritual guides, invoking Ixchel's blessings during labor. Offerings were made to the goddess at shrines and in household altars, asking for safe delivery and healthy children. Weaving, another domain under Ixchel's guidance, was more than a craft. It was a form of cosmic ordering. The act of weaving mirrored the creation of the universe itself, a binding of threads into patterns that reflected balance and harmony. Women who wove did not just produce clothing or goods, they reenacted mythic creation. In this sense, every woven cloth was a sacred object, bearing both aesthetic beauty and spiritual meaning. Ixchel was also venerated at major pilgrimage sites, such as the island of Cozumel off the eastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Historical sources describe the island as a destination for women, particularly those seeking fertility or recovery from illness. Pilgrimages to Cozumel were acts of devotion that reinforced female networks of spiritual practice, community, and health. These journeys demonstrate the scale and seriousness of women's religious life in the pre-Columbian era. Beyond Ixchel, Mayan mythology includes other important female figures. The hero twin's mother, sometimes called Exquic, is a central character in the Popol Vuh. She is impregnated through a miraculous act when the severed head of Hunhunahpu spits into her hand and flees the underworld to give birth in the world above. Exquic's story combines themes of survival, transformation, and divine conception. Her role underscores the sacred power of women to bring forth life, not only in a biological sense, but also in a cosmological one. Exquic is a liminal figure. She crosses between worlds, Xibalba and the earth, and in doing so, she transmits divine lineage to her sons, the hero twins. Her actions bridge death and life, darkness and rebirth. In mythological terms, she is a source of continuity and hope, embodying the creative potential that balances the chaos of the underworld. In addition to mythic figures, historical records and monuments reveal that real women held positions of power and ritual responsibility. In cities such as Yaxchilan, royal women are depicted participating in bloodletting ceremonies, summoning divine visions, and standing beside their kingly husbands as ritual equals. One of the most famous images comes from Lintel 24, which shows Lady Kabul Zouk pulling a thorned rope through her tongue as part of a bloodletting rite. From the resulting blood, the vision serpent emerges, bringing forth a warrior ancestor. This scene is not merely symbolic. It is a visual testimony to women's role as channels of divine power. The ritual performed by Lady Zouk was critical to the spiritual and political order of Yaxchilan. Her blood offering invoked the ancestors, confirmed dynastic legitimacy, and re-established the connection between the living and the dead. Without her participation, the ritual would have been incomplete. Elite women were often responsible for preparing sacred offerings, conducting calendrical rites, and maintaining household shrines. In some cases, women acted as diviners, interpreting signs in the stars, in dreams, or in the patterns of seeds and shells. These women were not exceptions. They were part of a broader religious system in which gender roles were dynamic and complementary. Some inscriptions refer to Kalumte, a title typically reserved for the highest-ranking male lords. Yet there are instances where women may have held similar titles or been recognized as de facto rulers during periods of transition. In Naranjo, for example, a queen named Wak Chanil Ajao, also known as Lady Six Sky, played a critical role in re-establishing the city's political and ritual power after a period of instability. She presided over key ceremonies and oversaw the accession of her son to the throne, ensuring dynastic continuity. Lady Six Sky's rule was not symbolic. Her name appears on monuments, her deeds are recorded in glyphs, and her presence in ritual scenes affirms her central role in the governance and spiritual life of Naranjo. Her leadership demonstrates that women could wield both earthly and cosmic authority when called upon by lineage, destiny, or circumstance. The connection between women and agriculture is another important theme in Mayan ritual life. Women were traditionally responsible for preparing maize-based foods such as tamales and atole, which were not merely meals but sacred offerings. During agricultural festivals, women often led the preparation of ritual food, offered prayers, and participated in dances. These acts were understood as nourishing not only their families but the gods themselves. In domestic shrines, women maintained altars to family ancestors and household spirits. These private rituals involved incense, flowers, candles, and food offerings. Through these practices, women acted as the keepers of familial continuity, ensuring that the living remained in harmony with the dead. Ancestor veneration was not confined to public temples. It was a living tradition maintained day by day within the home. The role of women in Mayan ritual also extended to music and dance. Women played instruments such as drums and rattles and participated in ceremonial dances that reenacted mythological events. These performances were not peripheral. They were core elements of festivals and calendar rituals. In some communities, women led dances in honor of rain gods, fertility deities, or patron saints, continuing a tradition that blended pre-Columbian and post-conquest spiritual forms. Importantly, the spiritual significance of women did not end with death. Ancestor shrines often included images or names of revered female relatives. In some cases, women were buried with ceremonial objects indicating their ritual status, such as jade beads, shell ornaments, or figurines. These burials reflect not only personal honor, but a recognition of the woman's sacred role within the community. In contemporary Maya communities, the legacy of these roles remains visible. Women continue to be midwives, healers, weavers, and spiritual leaders. Traditional rituals dedicated to Ixchel, or the moon goddess, are still performed, especially in the highlands of Guatemala and in rural parts of the Yucatan. The transmission of calendar knowledge, herbal medicine, and ceremonial practice often flows through female lineages, preserving ancient traditions in living form. The mythology and ritual life of the Maya placed women in positions of cosmic importance. Whether as goddesses, queens, priestesses, or keepers of the hearth, women shaped the sacred world. Their blood, their breath, their prayers, and their hands were woven into the cycles of creation and renewal. In the final centuries of the Classic period, roughly between the 8th and 9th centuries of the Common Era, many of the great cities of the Maya lowlands began to experience profound transformations. Monumental construction slowed, political authority fractured, and long-standing urban centers such as Tikal, Copan, and Palenque fell into silence. For centuries, this decline puzzled archaeologists and historians, leading to questions about why such a highly developed civilization appeared to collapse. From a modern scientific perspective, multiple factors likely contributed to the Maya collapse: environmental degradation, prolonged droughts, internecine warfare, overpopulation, and disruptions to trade networks. But to understand how the Maya themselves may have interpreted these events, we must return to their mythology. For the Maya, the collapse of cities was not merely a political or environmental failure. It was a cosmic event, a crisis in the sacred order of the world. Their myths and rituals reveal a people deeply attuned to cycles of creation and destruction. And for them, decline was not the end. It was a passage into transformation. One of the most important frameworks for understanding this worldview lies in the long count calendar. As explored in an earlier section, this calendar tracked time in vast cycles known as baktuns, each lasting approximately 400 solar years. The completion of a baktun, or even shorter intervals such as katuns, carried immense spiritual significance. The Maya believed that with each closing cycle, the universe entered a moment of uncertainty, a liminal space where the balance between cosmic forces could falter. Evidence from inscriptions shows that Maya rulers were keenly aware of these cyclical thresholds. They commemorated the endings of katuns with ritual performances, reaffirmations of divine legitimacy, and public works. However, as the classic period progressed, records of these commemorations become less frequent in many city-states. Some stelae from the late 8th century depict troubled omens, crooked trees, broken symbols, and celestial misalignments. These may suggest a growing sense of disorder and anxiety within the sacred timeline. One concept that appears in later Maya thought, particularly in highland traditions preserved after the classic collapse, is the idea of world renewal through destruction. The Popol Vuh and other texts speak of previous worlds that were created and then destroyed due to imbalance, disobedience, or failure to honor the gods. In this view, the current world, ours, is only the latest in a sequence of creations. Each ended not because of political weakness, but because it had exhausted its sacred viability. This belief may have shaped how the Maya understood the decline of their own cities. Droughts, famines, and warfare would not have been interpreted as random or purely material events. Instead, they would have been seen as symptoms of divine withdrawal or cosmic imbalance. If rulers failed to perform rituals correctly, if sacrifices were insufficient, or if the sacred calendar was disrupted, the gods might respond by withholding blessings, especially rain, the most essential and sacred element in the agrarian Maya world. The connection between ritual failure and drought is especially important. Climatic studies of lake sediments and tree rings suggest that prolonged periods of drought occurred during the very centuries when major cities began to decline. The Maya did not rely on large rivers, but on seasonal rainfall and reservoirs. If rain did not come, crops failed and famine followed. In myth, rain was controlled by deities such as Chak, who required offerings, songs, and reverence. A failure of rain, then, was a failure of communication between humans and gods. Rituals designed to bring rain often involved bloodletting, dancing, and processions. Priests and rulers climbed temple steps, burned copal incense, and called out to the heavens. In times of drought, these rituals likely intensified. Communities may have increased offerings, held emergency ceremonies, and consulted diviners for answers. But if the rain still did not fall, the spiritual crisis deepened. People may have begun to question their leaders' divine favor or the efficacy of their rites. The mythic interpretation of collapse is also visible in the abandonment of monuments. In several cities, stelae remain unfinished. Temples show signs of halted construction. These are not just signs of economic strain. They may reflect a loss of confidence in the ruling elite's ability to maintain cosmic order. If a king could no longer guarantee harmony with the gods, his legitimacy crumbled. When faith in the sacred structure of rulership faltered, cities lost their spiritual anchors. At the same time, some communities responded with reorientation. New centers emerged in different regions, often in more defensible or agriculturally stable locations. The post-classic cities of the northern Yucatan, such as Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and Uxmal, arose with different political and ritual configurations. Though these cities continued many elements of classic Maya culture, they also introduced changes in architectural style, iconography, and religious emphasis. One symbolic feature that emerges in this period is the feathered serpent deity, known as Kukulkan in Yucatec Maya. While similar to earlier serpent imagery, this god became more prominent in post-classic contexts and may have reflected shifting mythological frameworks. Kukulkan was a bringer of order, a civilizing figure, and a symbol of renewal, perhaps echoing a cultural desire to re-establish balance after centuries of upheaval. Oral traditions that survived into the colonial period often speak of great migrations, broken agreements with the gods, and cities swallowed by the jungle as punishment for hubris. These stories may preserve older beliefs about divine justice and cosmic cycles. The silence of the forest was not viewed as emptiness, but as a return to sacred equilibrium. Cities came and went, but the sacred land endured. Even in the wake of collapse, the Maya did not abandon their rituals. In smaller communities and dispersed settlements, ceremonies continued. The calendar was still consulted. Offerings were still made. Myths adapted to new conditions. The gods had not disappeared. They had simply withdrawn or moved to new places. In many cases, the people followed. Some scholars have compared the Maya collapse to the turning of a page in a sacred book. The story of one era ended and a new one began. This interpretation aligns closely with Maya conceptions of time as cyclical and layered. What appears as an end in one register is a beginning in another. Destruction is never final. It is part of the ongoing rhythm of creation. Today, the ruins of cities like Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul stand not only as archaeological wonders, but as mythic spaces. Trees grow through temples. Ceiba roots embrace stelae. The jungle reclaims stone with a quiet insistence that mirrors the Maya view of time. Nothing is lost. Everything returns. In modern Maya communities, the memory of collapse is woven into ritual and oral tradition. Ceremonialists still speak of times when the gods turned away or when balance was broken. These stories are not told in sorrow, but in reverence. They remind listeners that sacred order must be nurtured, that humans have responsibilities not only to each other, but to the cosmos itself. Following the decline of the great cities of the southern lowlands in the 9th century of the Common Era, Maya civilization did not disappear. Instead, it shifted, geographically, politically, and spiritually. During what scholars call the post-classic period, which spanned roughly from the 10th to the early 16th century, new centers of power arose in the northern Yucatan and highland regions. With these changes came new forms of expression, political organization, and mythological emphasis. The ancient stories did not vanish. They adapted. Where once cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque dominated, now urban centers such as Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and Uxmal came to the forefront. These cities represented a new phase of Maya life, less focused on monumental stone carving and dynastic ritual, and more on commercial expansion, religious federation, and regional integration. Trade with Central Mexican cultures intensified, and artistic motifs and religious symbols began to show signs of influence from places like Tula, the Toltec capital in the Central Highlands. The city of Chichen Itza, in particular, became a powerful religious and economic hub during this time. Unlike the more isolated dynasties of the Classic period, Chichen Itza appears to have been ruled by a collective or council system, perhaps involving multiple elite lineages or city-states. The architecture of the city reflected this cultural openness. Structures like the Temple of the Warriors, the Group of the Thousand Columns, and the Great Ball Court show clear architectural and iconographic elements associated with central Mexico. In mythology, one of the most striking developments of this period was the rise of the feathered serpent deity, known to the Maya as Kukulkan. Though serpent imagery had been present in Maya art for centuries, Kukulkan took on heightened importance during the post-classic. He appears not only in iconography, but in oral tradition as a bringer of culture, law, and order. Unlike some earlier deities associated primarily with specific forces, rain, maize, or the sun, Kukulkan was a figure of synthesis. He embodied wisdom, transition, and sacred kingship. Kukulkan's imagery, feathers representing the heavens and the serpent representing the earth, reflected a balance between opposites. He became a symbol of unity between sky and land, between old and new traditions. His presence at Chichen Itza suggests that post-classic religious life emphasized integration and reformulation of older myths rather than their abandonment. Another powerful deity during this time was Itzamna, whose role as a god of knowledge, writing, and calendrical order remained central. While earlier depictions of Itzamna show him as an aged scribe or celestial ruler, In the post-classic era, his imagery becomes more abstract and symbolic, appearing in codices and ritual books used by diviners and priests. This reflects the continued reverence for sacred knowledge, especially in the context of prophecy and ritual timing. Meanwhile, in the highland regions, particularly in present-day Guatemala, Maya groups such as the Quiche, Kaqchikel, and Tzutujil developed complex political and religious systems. They built cities like Cumarcaj, Iximche, and Zaculu, which served as new centers for ceremonial life. Though much of their architecture was built with perishable materials and thus less enduring than the stone cities of the lowlands, these highland centers were vital to the continuity of Maya culture. It is from this highland world that some of the most important mythological texts of the post-classic period emerge. The Popol Vuh, written down in the 16th century by a Quiche Maya author using Latin script, preserves much older oral traditions. This sacred book recounts the story of the creation of the world, the adventures of the hero twins, and the establishment of human life from maize. Though the text was recorded under colonial rule, it reflects a deep continuity of mythic thought that survived the centuries. The Popol Vuh and texts like the Chilam Balam books from Yucatan also reflect a growing interest in prophecy. These works include Katun prophecies, predictions tied to the 20-year cycles of the Maya calendar. The tone of these prophecies often shifts from celebratory to foreboding, hinting at political uncertainty and divine withdrawal. Some Katun prophecies speak of famine, invasion, or cultural disintegration, suggesting that the Maya were deeply aware of their changing world and sought to interpret it through sacred time. Another important text, the books of Chilam Balam, compiled by Maya scribes during the colonial period, contains fragments of myth, historical memory, medical knowledge, and astrological observations. These books reveal how Maya communities attempted to preserve their heritage while adapting to external pressures. Through these texts, we see myths being repurposed to explain new realities, such as the arrival of foreign peoples or the loss of ancestral cities. In both highland and lowland regions, the post-classic Maya continued to honor sacred geography. Pilgrimage sites such as Cozumel and Isla Cerritos remained active, with rituals performed for deities of fertility, rain, and navigation. The landscape continued to be read as a sacred text. Mountains were still seen as gods, caves as entrances to the underworld, and cenotes as portals to the spirit realm. The role of women in ritual also continued. Goddesses such as Ixchel were still invoked for childbirth, healing, and weaving. Female diviners played an essential role in interpreting dreams and omens. Some rituals were conducted exclusively by women, especially those concerning fertility and agricultural cycles. During the post-classic, trade intensified across Mesoamerica. The Maya exchanged obsidian, salt, cacao, and textiles with neighboring regions. This economic activity fostered not only material wealth but cultural exchange. Stories, deities, and rituals moved along these trade routes, blending traditions and reshaping mythological landscapes. However, alongside these developments, new threats emerged. Political instability, shifting alliances, and the looming presence of Spanish colonization would soon transform the world of the Maya forever. Yet, even as these challenges grew, the Maya continued to uphold their spiritual systems. In the face of adversity, they adapted. New myths emerged, old ones were reinterpreted, and ritual life remained active. The gods had not abandoned them. They had changed, just as the world had changed. The feathered serpent, the hero twins, and the maize god continued to appear in art and ceremony, not as relics of the past, but as living forces guiding the present. In the 16th century, a profound rupture shook the foundations of Maya civilization. Spanish conquistadors, missionaries, and colonial administrators arrived on the shores of the Yucatan Peninsula and the highlands of Guatemala, bringing with them a new political order, foreign gods, and a determination to dismantle indigenous belief systems. For the Maya, this was not merely the collapse of kingdoms or the loss of cities. It was an assault on the sacred structure of their world. Maya mythology, steeped in centuries of tradition, suddenly faced annihilation, not through natural decline or gradual adaptation, but through active suppression. The Spanish conquest introduced a worldview that directly challenged the cosmological order upheld by Maya priests, kings, and storytellers. Sacred texts were burned, ceremonial centers were desecrated, and religious leaders were persecuted. Despite this, Maya myths did not disappear. Instead, they went underground, hidden, adapted, and whispered from one generation to the next. The Spanish invasion of the Yucatan began in earnest during the early decades of the 16th century. Led by figures such as Francisco de Montejo and his son, Spanish forces encountered fierce resistance from Maya communities. Unlike the centralized empires of the Mexica or the Inca, the Maya were politically fragmented. This decentralization made full conquest slow and uneven, often taking decades to fully impose colonial rule. Alongside the military campaigns came the missionaries, particularly members of the Franciscan and Dominican orders. Their goal was not only to convert the Maya to Christianity, but to eradicate what they perceived as paganism. They targeted ritual practices, idols, and sacred books. The destruction of codices was especially devastating. These bark paper books, written in glyphs by trained scribes, contained centuries of accumulated wisdom, myth, astronomy, medicine, ritual, and history. Perhaps the most infamous example of this cultural destruction occurred under Fray Diego de Landa, a Franciscan friar who arrived in the Yucatan in the year 1562. Deeply disturbed by what he considered to be heretical practices, Landa ordered a mass burning of Maya texts and idols in the town of Mani. He later wrote, "We found a large number of books, and since they contained nothing but superstitions and lies of the devil, we burned them all." This act represents one of the most tragic losses in the history of indigenous literature. Only a handful of Maya codices survived the conquest: the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and possibly Grolier codices. These remnants offer only a glimpse into a once vast tradition of recorded knowledge. Yet, paradoxically, Diego de Landa also contributed to its partial preservation. In his later writings, especially the Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, he attempted to record aspects of Maya language, culture, and religion. Though riddled with errors and biases, his work became a critical source for modern scholars, attempting to decipher Maya glyphs. The violence of the conquest extended beyond manuscripts. Priests and ritual specialists were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Temples were converted into churches, idols were destroyed, and ceremonial calendars were banned. The Spanish crown sought to replace the cyclical and mythic time of the Maya with the linear Christian calendar, turning feasts of renewal into saints' days and harvest festivals into Catholic processions. Yet, even under such immense pressure, Maya mythology did not vanish. Instead, it transformed. In many cases, old gods were hidden beneath new forms. Deities were syncretized with Christian saints. Rituals were reinterpreted to align with Christian holidays, allowing communities to continue their practices under the gaze of colonial authorities. An example of this adaptation can be found in the continued reverence for the maize god, whose traits, resurrection, nourishment, and renewal, echoed aspects of Christian theology. In some regions, the maize god was associated with Jesus Christ, especially during the planting and harvest seasons. Similarly, the moon goddess Ixchel retained a presence in childbirth rituals, often invoked alongside the Virgin Mary. The survival of myth was also aided by oral tradition. Storytellers, elders, and ritual specialists continued to pass down narratives of the hero twins, the creation of the world, and the journey of souls through the underworld. These stories were often told during long nights, festivals, or private gatherings, far from the eyes of priests and officials. In this way, myth became a form of resistance, an act of cultural survival. In the highland regions, particularly among the Quiche and Kaqchikel, efforts to preserve sacred history took on new urgency. The Popol Vuh, written in the Quiche language using Latin script, was compiled during this period, likely in the early to mid-16th century. Though the original glyphic texts had been lost, the authors of the Popol Vuh sought to preserve their ancestral stories in a form that could survive Spanish scrutiny. They used Christian terminology and narrative structures while retaining the core elements of Maya cosmology. Similarly, the books of Chilam Balam, compiled in Yucatec-speaking communities such as Chumayel, Tizimin, and Mani, blended myth, prophecy, and colonial history. These texts preserved fragments of ancient knowledge, including Katun cycles, omens, medicinal practices, and accounts of conquest. The authors of these books were literate Maya scribes working under colonial rule, people who understood both the power of the written word and the danger of its misuse. These books became vessels for layered knowledge. On the surface, they might appear Christianized or historical, but beneath the surface, they held the rhythm of sacred time, the echoes of ancient gods, and the blueprint of a universe where cycles never truly end. Even the Spanish were forced to recognize the persistence of Maya beliefs. Repeated campaigns were launched to suppress so-called idolatry well into the 18th century. Inquisitors traveled village to village, confiscating ritual objects and interrogating those suspected of maintaining the old ways. Yet despite these efforts, the myths endured. They endured in the cornfields, where farmers whispered prayers to Chak before planting. They endured in the mountains, where candles were lit in caves to honor the spirits of the land. They endured in the language, where stories of celestial twins and creation still danced through syllables passed from grandmother to child. Colonization changed Maya religion, but it did not erase it. The gods changed their names. The stories shifted their tones. The rituals found new forms. But the heart of Maya mythology, its reverence for balance, its understanding of cycles, its deep connection to land, time, and cosmos, remained alive. Mayan mythology, once spoken in ceremonial centers beneath towering temples and carved into stelae under the gaze of the sun, now lives in fields, villages, homes, and classrooms. Despite centuries of conquest, forced conversion, cultural suppression, and modernization, the myths of the ancient Maya have not disappeared. They have endured, adapted, reinterpreted, and quietly passed down through generations. Today, Mayan mythology is not a relic of the past, but a living tradition, woven into the spiritual practices, languages, and identities of millions of Maya people across Mesoamerica. Throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, Chiapas, Guatemala, Belize, and western Honduras, more than 30 distinct Maya languages are still spoken. Each language group carries with it a slightly different version of myth, ceremonial practice, and cosmological understanding. While the names of gods may change and certain details may shift, the core ideas of balance, cyclical time, ancestral reverence, and the sanctity of nature remain constant. These ideas continue to shape daily life for many Maya communities, often in ways that blend ancient cosmology with modern realities. One of the most vivid examples of this continuity is found in the role of daykeepers, or ajkijab, in the Quiche language. These spiritual specialists are responsible for maintaining the sacred calendar, particularly the Tzolk'in, the 260-day ritual cycle still used in many regions. Daykeepers are called to their roles through dreams, visions, or lineage. They are trained in the meanings of each day sign and number, the relationships between divine energies, and the proper rituals to perform in response to life's events, births, illnesses, planting seasons, or communal needs. Daykeepers conduct ceremonies at altars built in open fields, at mountaintops, in caves, or beside sacred trees. These rituals involve offerings of candles, flowers, incense, copal, food, and occasionally blood. They begin by invoking the 4 cardinal directions, the ancestors, and the spirits of the land. Prayers are spoken in the local language, and each ritual is timed to harmonize with the cosmic energy of the calendar. These practices are not reenactments of ancient ceremonies, they are direct continuations. They reflect a worldview in which the gods are still present, the land still speaks, and time still flows in sacred cycles. For the people who participate in them, these rituals are not about preserving culture. They are about maintaining relationships with the forces that sustain life. Alongside these community-based practices, Efforts to revive and protect Maya mythology through scholarship and cultural preservation have grown steadily since the late 20th century. Maya intellectuals, linguists, anthropologists, and cultural activists have played key roles in reclaiming their heritage from colonial distortions and academic gatekeeping. This revival is not limited to research institutions. It extends to community schools, public murals, radio stations, and storytelling festivals. The republication and translation of key mythological texts, such as the Popol Vuh, the books of Chilam Balam, and the Rabin Ajar Chronicles, have made these stories more accessible to younger generations. Increasingly, these works are being published not only in Spanish or English, but in Mayan languages themselves, often accompanied by oral recordings. This linguistic revitalization has empowered communities to connect with their spiritual past in their own voices. Visual art has also become a powerful medium for mythological revival. Contemporary Maya artists are blending traditional iconography with modern techniques to depict scenes from mythology, such as the journey of the hero twins, the emergence of the maize god, or the descent into Xibalba. These images are appearing on canvases, murals, textiles, and even digital platforms. They serve as both education and affirmation, asserting that Maya stories still have a place in the present. Festivals and public ceremonies continue to be rooted in mythic themes. In many towns, celebrations of the agricultural calendar are held in honor of gods associated with rain, maize, fertility, and the sun. These events are often linked to Catholic feast days, a legacy of colonial syncretism, but the underlying meanings and symbols draw directly from pre-Columbian cosmology. The dance of the deer, the dance of the corn, and the ritual of the four winds are just a few examples of performances that carry mythic narratives into public space. Moreover, the Maya worldview is increasingly influencing environmental and land rights movements. The belief that mountains, rivers, and forests are sacred beings has become a foundation for resistance to deforestation, mining, and displacement. In this context, mythology is not abstract. It is a political language that asserts ancestral authority over territory and affirms the sacredness of land stewardship. The figure of the maize god continues to resonate strongly in agricultural rituals. In villages where milpa farming is practiced, the planting and harvesting of corn is surrounded by ceremonies invoking the spirit of maize. Seeds are blessed, fields are cleansed with incense, and first fruits are offered before consumption. These acts are not folklore, they are covenantal. They recognize the reciprocity between human beings and the divine energies that make life possible. Similarly, the story of the hero twins is still told, often in new forms. In some communities, they appear in shadow plays, puppet shows, or children's books. The twins are no longer only mythological heroes, they have become symbols of cleverness, resilience, and moral courage. Their story of descent into darkness, trial, and triumphant return remains a powerful allegory for personal and collective transformation. The role of women in contemporary Maya mythology has also seen renewed focus. Female deities such as Ixchel and Exquic are celebrated not only as symbols of fertility and motherhood, but as figures of independence, creativity, and strength. In some villages, women lead ceremonies, interpret dreams, and serve as calendar specialists. They are not only preservers of tradition, but innovators of it. Importantly, this resurgence is not limited to rural or isolated areas. In cities such as Quetzaltenango, San Cristobal de las Casas, Antigua, and Mérida, Maya students, artists, and community leaders are creating cultural centers, producing radio programs, and teaching mythology in classrooms. They are connecting the ancient with the modern, showing that Maya identity is not frozen in time but continuously evolving. Across Central America and southern Mexico, and among diaspora communities abroad, the legacy of Maya mythology continues to grow. It is being explored in academic conferences, revived in community rituals, and even dramatized in modern media. Films, novels, and digital platforms now carry Maya stories into the global imagination, often created by Maya voices themselves. Yet, for many, the true power of Maya mythology lies not in books or performances, but in the quiet moments, when a grandmother tells a story under a ceiba tree, when a child lights a candle for the ancestors, when a prayer is whispered over maize dough before it becomes tamales. In these moments, the past lives not as memory, but as presence. The survival of Mayan mythology is a testament to cultural resilience. Despite centuries of colonization, suppression, and change, the Maya have kept alive their sacred narratives, not only for themselves, but for the world. These stories challenge us to see time differently, to understand our connection to the land, and to honor the cycles of life and death not as endpoints, but as eternal flows. The story of Mayan mythology is not finished. It never was. It moves forward in the cadence of chants, in the scent of burning copal, and in the footsteps of those who still remember the old paths. From creation to collapse, from conquest to revival, the myths endure. And as long as the sun rises and maize grows, they will continue to speak.